passionate advocacy on behalf of the children of Milwaukee, all the children of the state. You have two different viewpoints on some specific measures. I have had the pleasure of serving with Senator Coggs for almost 28 years and have worked in concert with him on every major policy issue during those 28 years. I'm proud of that relationship. And over the past year, I've been fortunate to work with Representative Grigsby in her advocacy on behalf of children and family issues. So there is no question at all about anyone's commitment, whether you're for your bill or the other bill, to doing what is right for the children of this community and for all the children in this state. I think we're really at the heart of the matter, though, now that we've heard this wonderful, passionate testimony. And it is that, is to make a big factual observation. There are insufficient votes to pass the Mayoral Takeover bill. There are clearly insufficient, and I would hope that people would stop applauding. This is very, we need to show respect for everyone's point of view and listen carefully and patiently and appreciate different views. There is equal observation that there are not votes to pass your bill, which means we're at an impasse. And under an impasse, the status quo will prevail. Under an impasse, it means the children, no changes will occur. So the question I will ask both of you is the same question I asked of Representative Owens. Is A, if the legislature does nothing, if we don't find a way to exercise the will to enact meaningful reform that you can embrace, that I can embrace, and that others can embrace, that could become part of the legislature. But will we not be derelict in our duties of legislature to the children of this community? And will not the status quo prevail? And number two, what is it going to take to move us now, both sides, to a point where we come up with a compromise that is meaningful, so that we're not arguing about who is more right, but what is right?
Thank you for that observation. I believe that your assessment is correct. If we do nothing, if it becomes the status quo prevails, it is not Representative Grigsby my intention to have the status quo prevail, because no one in this room wants the status quo. I will say this. There are a number of conversations that are taking place behind the scenes that suggest that we, as opponents and proponents of our various proposals, need to continue to speak. And I would say to you that there's another such conversation that will happen within the next day or two. That's hopeful. But what we were so glad to have such a way to have this committee here today, because this will be the first time that the public gets a chance to demonstrate their preference. And I hope that people listen to the preference of the vast majority of the citizens of Milwaukee, so that when we go into negotiations, there is some real give and take in our conversation. But I think what happens in the next few days in the conversation will depend on what you hear the public say today. And I just think that the public is going to speak out very vigorously in favor of having some real reform, but also having an elected body that can actually do real legislative consensus reform.
The only thing I will add to that is when we talk about real improvements in MPS, I think that the data speaks for itself what's happened in the last year to 3 years as far as improvements that we've seen. It's documented, it may not be well publicized, but it's very clear. We have increased our graduation rates, we've saved money, we've done a lot of different things there. And then, as Senator Coggs explained, I think we are at the point where all parties are sitting down talking, and we're saying, how do we get to the middle ground? And truth be told, our bill was an attempt to do a middle ground, so I don't see it as polar opposites. I see us having already come to the middle, but we're still at the table, and we're still willing to be at the table until we come to some point where we have an actual piece of legislation that will create reform.
I applaud both of you for that public acknowledgement, because this is an important part of the expression of people's feelings. But ultimately, the legislature has to determine what is the will on behalf of the children who are being educated throughout this community and throughout the state. And we have, your leadership is going to be necessary to come up with that compromise. Those of us who aren't living here will encourage all sides to come up with some resolution that makes meaningful change. It cannot be tepid, it cannot be a placebo. I think you acknowledge that. It has to be meaningful, it has to demonstrate that we want to reform the structure. It could lead to improvement in greater accountability and educational improved outcomes. And it has to happen before the end of January. And I would hope that we leave here today with your firm conviction that we're going to work towards that goal.
Senator Olson. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a couple questions of clarification on for the authors and a last question for Dr. Bonds, if I could. Looking at your bill, and I was looking at how a superintendent is picked under your bill. And what I see is a superintendent search advisory committee made up of the mayor and the president common council and all that stuff. And they are to pick one person from the pool of applicants to recommend to the mayor. Then I see that the school board is to pick 3 recommendations to the mayor. And so I think there's 4 recommendations to the mayor, if my math is right, if I understand that. But the mayor can only interview 3 candidates, not 4. 4 names that are talking. But what's interesting is the mayor shall select the candidate from the 3 recommended by the board. And then make that recommendation back to the board. So I don't know what happened to that candidate that this committee brought forth to the mayor. I can't quite impart to the mayor. I can't figure that out. Then it says that the board shall by roll call select the superintendent of schools from the 3 candidates recommended by the board and notify the mayor of selection. And then the mayor can veto that selection, and if they do that, the board can override that selection by 2/3 vote, and if the board fails by 2/3 vote to override it, the board can, I think, simple majority, pick another candidate, not even their first choice. In my understanding, that's right, for me, it's either a Luke Goldberg or a mousetrap team, because I can't figure out who, everybody's got their fingers in it, but who is accountable and who is the superintendent accountable to, the mayor or the board, or, I mean, you got to compromise here, but I think it makes it really easy to point fingers when there's failures, because the mayor has his fingers in it, the board has his fingers in it, and it's not our fault.
If I could, Senator Olson, I just wanted to clarify there may be some discrepancy in maybe the language, which is, well, we don't have a bill number, but we will have one at the end of the week to clear up some of those issues. Basically, the process here is that, first of all, we created what we call a partnership for success that does include all of these parties that you talked about. And from the beginning, hoping that we can get everyone on the same page from the outset. If that doesn't happen, the mayor has an advisory board that is able to review all applications for superintendent.